Now, I think we're going to go with where we've been leading last night's documentary on Channel 4, the horrendous things, on Channel 4 News, excuse me, the horrendous things that Andrew Parker, and it appears that 3 other men linked to Reform, said during the course of canvassing from the Reform Party. Let's just have a look at just one, and there were several, of, well, the appalling examples of racism and homophobia. This one...
We can look at both. Our director's just asking which one. We can look at both of them if you like to.
Let's just look at what was said about Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister. Now, before we come to you, Jackie, and just to be clear, in a statement to Channel 4 News, Mr Nigel Farage said, "I'm dismayed by the reported comments of a handful of people associated with my local campaign, particularly those who are volunteers. They will no longer be with the campaign. The appalling sentiments expressed by some in these exchanges bear no relation to my own views, those of the vast majority of our supporters of Reform UK policy. Some of the language used was reprehensible."
He also added that he understood that most people, like you say, Rob, in that statement, don't express themselves that way and don't hold that views he believes that support reform. But he also said that he's aware that a lot of people didn't go to Oxford University, as though that would mean that they wouldn't speak like that. It's shocking, but is it surprising to see that, Jackie?
I mean, it is shocking. Those are really terrible things to say, with somebody wearing a Reform UK rosette. The only thing that it would have been appropriate for Nigel Farage to do is to distance himself from them in the way in which he did. But I think the point you're making, Kate, is he really distancing himself from them? Because, you know, I think there was another party spokesperson who said, well, people want politicians who speak clearly, and the sort of the Oxford University suggestion, which is also pretty reprehensible, actually. The idea that if you didn't go to Oxford University, somehow or another you don't know what's right and wrong. Well,
where did you
most
go to
people.
university?
Yeah, I went to Oxford. Yeah, quite. That's my point. You don't have to have gone to Oxford University to know what's right and what's wrong, and that's very, very wrong.
Ian?
It is very, very wrong, and the language used in some of those clips was reprehensible. I can't excuse it at all. Why would I? And I think Nigel Farage has done exactly the right thing. I mean, in your news bulletin, you had an interview with him where he did... I mean, he's chucked them out, just as you would expect him to do so. I mean, if that were Reform UK candidates, it would be even more serious. But I mean, this guy, the main one that's been accused of this, I mean, he's just... a person who goes canvassing, knocks on doors. Now, I wouldn't particularly want that man knocking on my door, I have to say. But look, these views are expressed by people. Let's not try and pretend that these are the only people that have these kind of views. And I think politicians of all parties need to understand where they come from.
Although that's not to say that... and I think it's a mistake if politicians say, well, everybody who votes for reform shares those sorts of views. I absolutely don't think they do.
No.
And I think the worst thing to do if you're trying to engage in a political debate with somebody is to tar a whole group of people as racist when they're not. He clearly is.
Well, Andrew Parker, the man who used that racial slur against the Prime Minister, has said, "I would like to make it clear that neither Nigel Farage personally or the Reform Party are aware of my personal views on immigration." So he is distancing himself from the party. But, of course, if you're saying that, as you say, with holding a banner for the party, as it were, then that's not going to help. Interesting reaction from our viewers this morning. Huge disgust in many parts, but also a couple here that says, you know, Mark J, everybody has a few dodgy characters, including Labour, which has more than its fair share. But, of course, Channel 4 is only targeting reform. Another one saying, you know, the BBC, ITV and Channel 4 will do anything to slur the Reform Party. And then David saying, why is everyone surprised? We all know Reform is a right-wing party that attracts far-right-wing activists. In a sense, this isn't a revelation. It's a Reform Party political broadcast.
There is a slight point to that, I think, because if you are on the extreme right, there's nothing wrong with being right-wing, which sometimes I think in the media people seem to think there is. There's nothing wrong with being right of centre. But if you hail from the sort of National Front BNP end of the right-wing spectrum, then when you grow up a bit, you might want to join a sort of more respectable party. And I think that's been the challenge for the Conservatives in the past, but now more for then UKIP and now for Reform, as to try and weed out these people and not let them in the first place. Now, you're never going to weed all of them out. You're never going to prevent people from joining, because, I mean, all political parties want new members, and you can't vet every single person that joins your party. So that's a real challenge, I think.
There's a point, Ian makes quite an important point. Of course, one of the things, if we want to find something positive about this, is that actually, of course, the British National Party, the National Front, I don't think they're standing any candidates in this election. And that's because they've been campaigned out of existence by people who were willing to stand up to them and the sort of racism and horrible threatening behaviour that they represented.
Do you think there are, canvassers from other political parties? You know, Labour has had its problems, to say the least, and, you know, those who are volunteers who are going knocking on doors. You know, if cameras were to show up and follow them around, they'd probably have a whole buffet of reprehensible things to say. Well,
we were talking on our podcast just last night about the new phenomenon.
A new convert.
I'm a huge fan in every way.
About the phenomenon that I've noticed in this election of ring those bells on doors, which also have cameras in them. And apparently there have been some campaigners who've been caught, you know, let's be honest, everybody may well go to a doorstep and then come back and say, oh, no, I wouldn't go there, you know, you've got a very shabby response or something like that. Well, you have to be very careful now because that's actually being recorded.
Yeah, so, I mean, maybe the rule is just don't say anything you don't want broadcast.
Exactly.
You know, about people generally, really. But we all have, I suppose, human moments. But there's a difference between that and what we've been talking about here. Just before we move on to other elements, one thing we should say, that was part of campaigning for Nigel Farage. There are other candidates standing in the Clacton constituency. Nigel Farage is, those are the list of other people there that you can do. But also, you know, we're talking about this because it's a campaign for a general election, and Reform has been seen various times as a potential, you know, disaster for the Conservative Party, as possibly increasing a supermajority for Labour or having an effect in other parts on Labour. You know, when things like this are broadcast, what are the other parties thinking? Are they thinking that's damaged Reform, or what are they thinking? How does it affect voting?
Well, the Conservatives will be quite pleased that you're leading with this today, because Reform, in a way, I think, are going to determine how big the Labour majority is, because they will be leeching votes away from the Conservatives in the south. I mean, it's not just ex-Conservatives that are voting for Reform. Many Labour people are too, but fewer. And in the north, if they take votes away from, if Reform take votes away from the Conservatives, that gives Labour a bigger chance in the north. So they're going to have a huge influence on this. But since Nigel Farage's, shall we say, unfortunate comments about Putin and Ukraine, I think the wind has completely gone out of their campaign. And they haven't really hit the headlines since that.
We'll see. No, we'll see. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, talking of stumbles, last night's presidential debate. You know, I know you've got...
Well, early this morning, in some ways. People watching won't have seen this, I don't suppose, because you'll have been tucked up in bed, but...
I got up to watch it, and, you know, some people may argue that it's not exactly, to put it euphemistically, the best choice for the American public in their history. Just have a look at, well, this is President Biden in the presidential debate, stumbling over his words. Ian?
It's sort of heartbreaking in a way, isn't it?
I watched it, so I've come here without having had a wink of sleep overnight. But
grumpy?
I'm not grumpy. Really not grumpy. It was appalling. I mean,
Well, just to clarify, because we have to say that this is a big debate between the two leaders. When you say it was appalling, is it both sides?
Well,
or
the whole debate was appalling, where Trump was, shall we say, being a little bit loose with the facts. And Biden, that was not the only incident where he lost his way. And, I mean, as a viewer, Donald Trump actually said, I think, just after that, well, I don't know what you just said there, and I suspect he doesn't either, which was a bit cruel, but true. And everybody watching could see it. And, I mean, it was one of those things you almost want to sort of go behind the sofa because it was just so cringingly embarrassing to watch. Now,
what's going on with Joe Biden? Is he, because part of what this debate is for Democrat supporters in the US, and we should say, because we're obviously talking a lot about our election here, that there's a big election in the autumn there, and I'm sure you both will highlight why that's important for us here as well. For Democrat supporters, they were hoping that overnight they would see a Joe Biden that proved to the naysayers that he had stamina, that his health was strong. There's been lots of questions about his age, even though Trump is only 3 years younger. You know, what was the concern?
Well, the concern was that he's losing his cognitive abilities. I mean, it's horrible to talk about an old man on live television and start talking about his health when, I mean, we're not qualified medics, but medical people, they see signs of deterioration. Now, he may well serve the end of his term, but within minutes of that debate last night, and it wasn't just Trump supporters, this was sort of Democratic supporting journalists in America were openly discussing about replacing him on the ticket. Now, you wonder the timing of this debate, because normally these debates take place in the autumn. It's never taken place in June before. And you wonder whether there's some sort of, they thought, oh, well, let's do it the first one early, so we've actually got time to replace him before the convention. I think the convention is much later than normal and starts on the 19th of August. It would be astonishingly difficult to do.
Yeah.
And there's no obvious person to succeed him, because Kamala Harris, the vice president, no one rates her either.
I mean, Trump as well was almost quite gentle because of that, because it almost floored him, and a lot of criticism of how much he said that didn't seem to have any basis in fact.
Yeah, you're both being very gentle about that. He's,
Go on,
he's a liar. And, you know, that was demonstrated on that particular debate. But, you know, to return to the issue with both of them, actually, you're right, Kate, that it matters to us here who the American people decide to elect as their president. We have an enormously important relationship with the US, an enormously important defence and security relationship. And the leader of the United States plays a fundamental role in geopolitics and in leading big debates in the West and across the world. And if that is not somebody who people feel is capable and able to do that, that's worrying for all of us, actually.
Just looking at that debate, you know, you're a very senior figure in the cabinet. How do you characterise it? I mean, it's a sort of similar thing to the election here. It feels sort of generationally depressing. You've got a choice between, in that case, is it your characterisation, a liar, and somebody, as Ian describes, losing his cognitive abilities. We're going to come back to politics here, but it's worth just having another look at the remark that you're talking about during the course of the debate. I wonder, Jackie, you know, there you are as a politician. Back in the past, you would have to work with the American... well, not that... Well, relatively long ago. I mean, you might have... Well, things look better now. I think you certainly seem happier now than you did back then. But the thing is, as most ex-politicians or recovering politicians do, it seems. But now you're free and you can be honest about it. You know, looking at that, how do you characterise it? You know, how on earth is that defendable by, you know, any serious politician or Democratic supporting member of the political class in America? Well, I
mean, to go back to my previous point, you know, it is important for us and our politics in this country that we have a stable and good relationship with the US. It's for the US people to decide who it is that they're going to elect as their president, but there's a responsibility for the political groupings in the US to make sure they're putting in front of the American people the type of candidate who can lead the free world, if that's the way that we still want to think about the US
You see, the
president.
problem is, if you're a floating voter watching that, you come out of that debate more likely to vote for Donald Trump than you do for Joe Biden. I say that as somebody who would never vote for Donald Trump in a month of Sundays. But even after that, I was thinking, well, maybe I've got this wrong. Should I even be thinking of supporting Biden?